Okay, on 143, we've got Simon, who has come across what he now recognizes as the beast, right? So they're all trying to figure out, what the beast is and why they should be afraid of the beast and how to sort of guard against the beast. And Simon finds this pig head on top of a stake, right, covered in flies, and he's like, he recognizes that as a beast. Sorry, I gotta make sure. See everybody. Okay, cool. So we're going to read this through, and then you're going to try and find a theme from just this little passage, and you're going to write that theme down. You can write it, on a piece of paper that I gave back to you, or wherever. I'm not going to gather this one. All right. You are a silly little boy, said the Lord of the Flies, just an ignorant, silly little boy. Simon moved his swollen tongue, but said nothing. Don't you agree, said the Lord of the Flies. Aren't you just a silly little boy? Simon answered him in the same silent voice. Well then, said the Lord of the Flies, you'd better run off and play with the others. They think you're batty. You don't want Ralph to think you're batty, do you? You like Ralph a lot, don't you, and Piggy and Jack? Simon's head was tilted slightly up. His eyes could not break away, and the Lord of the Flies hung in space before him. What are you doing out here all alone? Aren't you afraid of me? Simon shook. There isn't anyone to help you, only me, and I'm the beast. Simon's mouth labored, brought forth audible words. Pig's head on a stick. Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill, said the head. For a moment or two, the forest and all the other dimly appreciated places echoed with the parody of laughter. You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no go, why things are what they are. The laughter shivered again. Come now, said the Lord of the Flies. Get back to the others and we'll forget the whole thing. Simon's head wobbled. His eyes were half closed as though he were imitating the obscene thing on the stick. He knew that one of his times was coming on. The Lord of the Flies was expanding like a balloon. This is ridiculous. You know perfectly well you'll only meet me down there, so don't try to escape. Simon's body was arched and stiff. The Lord of the Flies spoke in the voice of a schoolmaster. This has gone quite far enough, my poor misguided child. Do you think you know better than I do? There was a pause. I'm warning you, I'm going to get angry. Do you see? You're not wanted. Understand? We're going to have fun on this island. Understand? We're going to have fun on this island. So don't try it on, my poor misguided boy, or else. Simon found he was looking into a vast mouth. There was blackness within, a blackness that spread. Or else, said the Lord of the Flies, we shall do you. See, Jack and Roger and Maurice and Robert and Bill and Piggy and Ralph, do you see? Simon was inside the mouth. He fell down and lost consciousness. Okay, so I want you to jot down right now, based on just that little passage, what do you think is a theme that is prevalent in that passage? Or that is not prevalent, but illustrated in that passage? Yeah, and you can write it on a phone or you can write it on the paragraph I just passed back to you, wherever. I just want you to be able to reference it. Thicker than it's ever. Like that. Normally I don't mind it. So you don't need the thesis, the whole thesis. I'm just looking for the theme. Or a theme, obviously, that could be wrong. Can someone volunteer their theme so that we can we're going to listen to your theme and then we're going to try and find the textual evidence to prove that your theme is actually here. So can someone volunteer theirs? Okay, Sam, I'm gonna write it down.
All right, so still a work in progress, but I put for those atop a truly violent hierarchy, sadism becomes bandwagon.
You said truly violent?
Mhm.
Sadism becomes bandwagon. Okay, tell me what you were thinking about with that theme.
So the basic idea is that when you have a situation where hunting and killing and violence is commonplace,
Yeah.
It becomes sort of just enjoyable fun, right, for everyone who's kind of atop that general hierarchy that's been established, right? It's nothing more than a game in a way. And the passage that I thought most illustrates this would be, I'm warning you, I'm going to get angry. You see, you're not wanted. Understand, we're going to have fun on this island. Understand, we are going to have fun, so don't try it, my poor misguided boy, or else. And then it talks about Jack, Roger, Maurice, Robert, Bill, Piggy, and Ralph. They'll do him in if he tries to kind of obstruct this. And so it's almost like the group in general, particularly the hunters, I guess, kind of produce the sadistic quality with respect to their perception of the island and those involved. And anyone who's a threat to that, i.e. Simon, is, they're going to do them in.
Okay, good. So it kind of then creates this kind of hierarchy that's full of insiders and outsiders, right? Not necessarily this part of the hierarchy isn't like Jack's on top influencing a bunch of people. It's like whoever can get on board with this particular brand of violence and fun can be in the in group, and then they have to kind of ostracize the out group, right? And when it's based on violence, the out group can't survive because they've got to have somebody that they are attacking. Hey, wrong class.
I'm just thinking.
Okay. Okay. Have a Slurpee for breakfast? That's a good friend. All right, back to sadism and violence. Okay. All right, so I get that in that passage. So everybody else, we're trying to show that the violence here has kind of shifted from being useful violence potentially, because violence in a society can be useful, right? It can be useful for a number of different reasons. One, it's like they're actually going to survive on this island. Like they're going to get protein through their use of violence. So it is good. In some ways, it's a good thing that they're hunting down pigs and killing pigs, because it seems by the end of this book, it's not clear, but like their hair has grown pretty long. So it seems like they've been on this island for quite a while. To subsist on just fruit, they're going to be totally malnourished. So in some ways, that violence is very useful. There's other useful reasons for violence. If, like Freud says, we're like really aggressive at our hearts, then there's got to be some way for us to kind of let that violence out, kind of have that outlet for violence, right? And so in some ways, a little bit of violence can keep a society bonded together. And that can be done through like having a scapegoat or through like particular brands of punishment. Like maybe, for example, like capital punishment is not a useful deterrent to people. Like it's not like people don't commit crimes because they're afraid of capital punishment. Maybe capital punishment is useful because it's a way that society gets to act out its violence. We all get to like celebrate a guy, being electrocuted, but then we don't have to act that violence out ourselves. So that makes sense. It's a dark thought, but maybe that's the case. This, though, is not about, Sam is saying, it is not about useful violence anymore. It is kind of bringing out the like kind of joy in violence and the joy of being on top and maintaining your position through violence. So through this passage, find instances in this passage that support that theme. What do you think? Yeah.
I think one is when one of the guys wasn't just a silly little boy.
Mhm.
And that just kind of how but it was the other
Hannah Arendt, that one.
said like laughter, and, like laughter is like not fitting in, and I think like the fact that it uses silly kind of creates a tone of unimportance. And there's the whole island that kind of actually sounds like
Well, it is like 7:30 in the morning.
yeah,
You're forgiven.
existential, like the feeling like that nothing matters. What is
Oh, I don't know, existential malaise, existential dread, or,
yeah, like that kind of attitude toward it.
yeah. Okay, so like that the island, like nothing really matters on the island because,
Like do it.
yeah, so like it's kind of like hedonistic here on this island. I'm not sure what the word you were looking for is. It's actually kind of seems like it's on the top of my head too.
Nihilistic.
Nihilistic, thank you. Okay, so it gives it this kind of nihilistic idea. And I love that you bring in that silly little boy as a way of mocking it, right? Because if you look a little bit further, it also says that, and all the other dimly appreciated places echoed with the parody of laughter. I like this idea of the parody of laughter. It's not actually a funny situation, but it's like you use the laughter and you use the belittling as a way of like undercutting any kind of authority that a boy could have. And calling him little too. It's like a way of saying like you are insignificant in this whole scheme. You can't change anything, and you know who you are as a person, as an individual, doesn't matter. You are just a boy, you know. So I really like that. Okay, what else can we find in this little passage that helps prove this particular thing? Yes, Sam.
So I noticed just a little ways down from that, it starts saying things like, you knew, didn't you, I'm part of you, close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no go, why things are what they are.
Yeah.
Come now, get back together, and we'll forget the whole thing.
So it seems like the pig head on the stick is kind of representation of, you know, I guess something that encapsulates the framework of this violent hierarchy, but then also a victim of it, right? Because it's the pig that's been slaughtered and just put on a stake here, like for the imaginary beast, right? The head
Yeah.
isn't really used for anything important, and the guts were just kind of thrown off to the side. And it's almost like Simon is in a way akin to that right now. You know,
Yeah.
because the pig itself is very close to him in that way. However, if you were to just forget about the whole thing and go and join the group, then it's fine, and they can just forget about that. He can kind of adhere to the system they've created.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, so it's like both a representation of kind of like the evil that can exist inside people when he says, I'm a part of you, but it is also then a representation of how that evil can undo people and like actually turn them into victims. Yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. So yeah, I think the first part of that paragraph too, like Simon is trying to dismiss this pig being the beast by saying it's just a pig's head on a stick. And here the beast says, fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill. Like the beast, the pig's head, the Lord of the Flies, is insisting on its own kind of mythological origins. Like it's saying to Simon, no, I am a symbol and you must understand me as a symbol. And I think it works in that way where it's a symbol for both things, both the danger and the fun of the violence. Angelina?
Oh, I
Uh-huh.
and I wasn't really raising my hand. I was gonna raise my hand earlier.
Oh,
but-
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay, sorry. We'll come back when you want to raise your hand.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else in this passage that helps prove Sam's point? What are we gonna do with the fact that Simon is having this, like, have you guys seen or read The Shining? This reminds me of The Shining. And I really wonder if Stephen King like was very inspired by this section, because here's this kid like basically going into it. Nobody has seen it. Okay, never mind that. But it's this kid sort of going into a seizure, it seems like, correct? Like he talks about how he's gonna have one of his fits, one of his times, that's what they call it, one of his times. And then he's like, starts to black out. There starts to be this kind of like tunnel vision and he's fainting. He lost consciousness. What do we do with that and Sam's point here? Because it's good to like pick out the evidence that supports it, but we can't leave out the really significant moments of the passage either. We have to see how that supports the Stevens model. What do we do with the idea that Simon blacks out? Brooklyn?
As part of my thing, I just like, how there's kind of two ways to decide, like, oh, they're want to have society or like, be destroyed by it, and maybe just adding that other option, like, so bandwagon, or like, I don't know exactly how to word it.
Yeah, it's somehow like, I think the best word here, because it looks like he's going into the mouth, is kind of consumed by it. Like that he's consumed, not in the way that like someone like Jack is consumed, where he kind of just revels in the violence, but consumed by it like he is literally being eaten up by the violence and destroyed. Yeah.
I feel like the whole idea of being eaten up, it kind of reminds me of like his fears taking over. And
Yeah.
so he's wanting to be with the majority, but he doesn't.
Yes. Yes, good. So like part of the thing that the like one of the things that the Lord of the Flies is using against him is his desire to actually be accepted. Because when it talks about Ralph, it's like, you don't want Ralph to think you're like a weirdo, right? Like come and join us. And so it's like his terror doesn't get an outlet then, because he doesn't want to join the violence, and that's pretty clear. And yet he also doesn't want to be ostracized, and he doesn't have an option for how to fit into society then. Okay, tell me, last thing, tell me why it's called the Lord of the Flies. Kylie?
Aren't there like a bunch of flies flying around?
Yeah, so in some ways it's literal, but there are like, it says it's covered like a couple pages earlier. It's just such a great image. I mean, horrible, but the pile of guts was a black blob of flies that buzzed like a saw. So that's the pile of guts, but you can assume that on the pig's head too. So it's just, oh, I hate flies. It's just sort of like so covered in flies that you can't even like actually see the thing. And just every once in a while, you might get a little like peek of like a dead eyeball, like, sticking out of that pig's head. I just like doing that to you guys. But yeah, it's like, it's this disgusting thing that is literally covered in flies. What's the reference to? Yeah, Angelina? To Satan himself. Yeah, the Lord of the Flies is something that Satan is called. So let's think about that idea of like the rotting nature of it attracting the flies, and then the idea that it becomes lord over those flies. Well, how is that significant in this passage, do you think? And we don't necessarily just have to think of this thing. We can think of anything for this. Kylie? Mhm.
So by common, like, they're kind of treating this beast as like a way to live their lives, almost treating it as a god. And
Mhm.
so the fact that, I don't know,
They've kind of become Satan worshipers then?
yeah, that's where I was going.
Okay, yeah, their behavior has become so ritualized that you kind of identify that too. There's something demonic about the way that they're behaving. Brooklyn?
I think that also, the, like, how they cut the pig's head off and specifically like dedicated it, like, this is their offering for the,
Yeah.
and while they're like trying to ward it off or like keep it happy, they're kind of like using it like, also they're accepting like it's like this violent lifestyle.
Yeah.
That like this is something that they.
Right, because when you make sacrifices to something, that's a sign of worship. It's not a sign of like being terrified of that thing and trying to keep it at bay. Or maybe it's kind of both. Like, isn't worship kind of being terrified of that thing as well? Anyway, yeah, Angelina. Yeah. Yeah. And so in this instance, it is Satan, like the Lord of the Flies is something that they built themselves. And that they have been kind of like accepted. And so it kind of does seem like it's a part of them. At the same time, and this goes back to that central question we've been talking about this whole time, it also seems to be this kind of outside force. Even though the beast is saying like, I am a part of you, the book has the beast speaking out loud as though it is actually something else. So again, it comes back to that question, is this something that is natural within them, or is this something that is imposed in some way? Like, would they have behaved this way if a Satan did not exist, you know? And then go to the very end of this book. Let's just look to wrap things up. Okay, so Ralph is running away. Ralph is, nearing death here. And it says, he staggered to his feet, tensed for more terrors, and looked up at a huge peaked cap. It was a white topped cap, and above the green shade of the peak was a crown, an anchor, gold foliage. He saw white drill, epaulets, a revolver, a row of gilt buttons down the front of a uniform. A naval officer stood on the sand looking down at Ralph in wary astonishment. On the beach behind him was a cutter, her bows hauled up and held by 2 ratings. In the stern sheets, another rating held a submachine gun. The ululation, I can never say that, faltered and died away. The officer looked at Ralph doubtfully, and for a moment, then took his hand away from the butt of the revolver. Hello. Squirming a little, conscious of his filthy appearance, Ralph answered shyly, hello. The officer nodded as if the question had been answered. Are there any adults, any grown-ups with you? Dumbly, Ralph shook his head. He turned a half pace on the sand. A semicircle of little boys, their bodies streaked with colored clay, sharp sticks in their hands, were standing on the beach, making no noise at all. Fun and games, said the officer. All right, why do you think that the book decides to end with their being rescued like this? How does that kind of underscore the things that the book has been saying, the themes that the book's on? See?
I think it's really interesting how before the book describes them, really puts it, and they're just little boys play on them. It's really changes. Or they seem intimidating and they seem scary, but now they just seem like little boys that are doing crazy things.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because it shows what people are capable of.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. And I love the way it turns them that way. And it talks about Jack. It says a little bit further on, it says, a little boy who wore the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair, and who carried the remains of a pair of spectacles at his waist, started forward, then changed his mind and stood still. So this, the head of their sadistic gang, the person that we fear the very most, is described here as being completely silly. Like he's a silly little boy now, just like the boy says, right? Why else do you think it ends this way with this particular rescue? Why a naval officer? Brooklyn.
It sounds like submachine gun and his revolver. And I think it's kind of like it's kind of shown as like a shot, a peaceful person, but like the connotations before are around him, and the fact that he has like heavy artillery is kind of like the dominance of a reformed kind of like, I guess. Just taking over their job.
Yeah, well said. And then at the same time, because it's flipped the image of the boys so easily, where it's just like suddenly after a page break, the boys become innocent, from like terrifying to innocent. I kind of wonder, like, what would a higher being looking down on the naval man, think about that naval man? Like, would we get another flip where it's like, look how ridiculous this person is, like playing at war, playing at like this, dress up that he's got going on. Like, it almost like, it inserts the guy as like the man at the end as this like figure of authority, but it's already kind of pulled authority out from under us just barely. So you're kind of like primed to see the guy at the end as ridiculous as you now see the little boys. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, it sets you up for being like, yes, this is the kind of reformed violence. It is threatening to us as people when we would see somebody in that kind of like official uniform and with this kind of artillery, right? but the book kind of laughs at the guy at the end when it's also laughing at the boy. So at the very, very end, it says, Ralph looked at him dumbly. For a moment, he had a fleeting picture of the strange glamour that had once invested the beaches, but the island was scorched up like dead wood. Simon was dead, and Jack had. The tears began to flow, and sobs shook him. He gave himself up to them now for the first time on the island, great shuddering spasms of grief that seemed to wrench his whole body. His voice rose under the black smoke before the burning wreckage of the island, and infected by that emotion, the other little boys began to shake and sob too. And in the middle of them, with filthy body, matted hair, and unwiped nose, Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true wise friend called Piggy. The officer, surrounded by these noises, was moved and a little embarrassed. He turned away to give them time to pull themselves together and waited, allowing his eyes to rest on the trim cruiser in the distance. Why do you think we end this book with the boys sobbing and crying over what has just happened and the officer turning away embarrassed and looking out to the cruiser? Sam?
It almost seems like he's now, I don't know, like he's turning away from like this awful situation that the boys have brought on themselves and everything, and you know, their grief and all that. But then he looks directly to almost a representation of the same thing, just on a larger scale.
Mhm,
You know, 'cause now it's like, you know, warships and everything, and
mhm.
the naval officer. It's like precisely what the boys are doing, just like more complex with more people involved.
Yeah.
And on what could be better characterized as a societal level.
Yes, yeah, and so it's like he's embarrassed by the level of emotion that the boys have, and so he turns to like the kind of order that society has imposed through its own accepted violence this time. Kylie?
I feel like it's kind of like, what's the word, like discrediting the boys' emotions, because it's like, oh, they're kids, they're just having fun. You can also say, but they're like silly little kids.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, fun and games, yeah.
fun and games. And so it's kind of like discrediting like everything the boys have been through. And it's like, oh, they're just kids, they're just having fun, they don't know what they're doing. I'm gonna go play my big boy game,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, by him being able to do that though, it's almost like what allows the boys to feel the emotions. Like, because it's the responsibility of maintaining that violent society and regulating violence is now off their shoulders, they get to actually feel like the innocent part of themselves, right? Like they could get to actually express emotions now, and they get to actually have time to reflect. So you think back to Freud and how he was talking about how one of the goals of society is for like intellectualism and like art and beauty and so on. It's like they almost have to have this adult in their life, the naval officer specifically, so that they get to enjoy the other parts of society that are so good, which is like crying together and communing together, you know. Brooklyn?
I think the fact that the naval officer kind of and like looks to his ship is kind of like a escape responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think Piggy and Simon are a reminder of what society was, and like the morals and emotions that like kind of drive society to like stay together, and the boys don't want to they end up dying because of like they want to get rid of that sense of responsibility. What about Simon? We killed him, we murdered him, and like forcing them to confront that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the soldier is sort of like turning away from the boys just to keep it off his let society handle it with it. Like no individual responsibility. They just turn to a whole society that group.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So that like by looking towards the group, which is like represented by this cruiser, he doesn't have to think about like, you know, the fact that he doesn't have to think about his own sort of violence within him. Yeah, Angelina. Yeah. Yeah, and that it's like a disease that rampages them, like they don't necessarily ask for that thing. It's just going to take them over. Yeah, that they're, I'm trying to think. Never mind, okay. Yes, okay.
Last thing, it kind of reminds me of how like, at least it's like when I'm like really upset and I can be like fine on it, but then the moment that someone else like, hey, are you okay? That acknowledging that there's a problem and I feel like everything just kind of.
Yes.
Even like little kids who like if they get hurt and like if no one, this on that, but if no one like acknowledges that, like sometimes they'll get back up and just like after someone comes to get them. Yeah, and like suddenly they feel that emotion so much.
Right, so do you think that particular reality is a sign that society is working, or is a sign that society can be bad? Because you're, before you could kind of just like rationalize like, no, I'm okay, I'm not sad. But as soon as somebody comes and says, are you sad, you break down. So does that show that we should be communal? Does that show that we would be our best selves if we were separated? Feeling?
I feel like it's best. People around you, everybody has interaction, and like it's really trying to that interaction and always coming without mentioning it.
Yeah, good. So it's that idea, I don't know if I showed you guys this, but sort of like the roiling, chaotic, kind of aggressive impulses we have inside of us, crying and sort of letting that out and feeling guilt and responsibility could be a way of easing that tension so that it doesn't have a bad outlet. Yeah, I think that's part of what's going on here at the end, is like knowing that these boys, when they get back home, they're not going to be violent anymore. Like Jack's not gonna get back home and like start a new gang where they beat up on the weaklings. Like this was their reaction to having to find correct outlets, and they weren't able to do it. Okay, we're gonna do the timed essay now. It doesn't have anything to do with Lord of the Flies. Because I still want to be practicing those short passage style of essays. So just like we did in the Lord of the Flies passage here, we found a theme, right, based on one small passage, and then we looked for multiple points in that theme, multiple textual pieces of textual evidence to back up that theme. And the one thing I want you to consider this time is not to leave a big part of the passage left unaccounted for. So if something important happens in that passage, you've got to find a way to incorporate that into your theme. Because with the pickle passage, and it might have been just because of time management and running out of time, there was a ton of great stuff on their interactions, but then I didn't get much about the actual duel itself. And so it didn't fully account for the passage. Does that make sense? Are you remembering the pickle passage? Okay, cool. So I've got, let me grab it. Sorry, do you want, I can move it so you can stretch it.
Oh, no, it's okay.
You're tall, aren't you? How tall are you?
5'11".
If I ever need something. So, giving you 2 pieces of paper because we're being optimistic.
Would I be able to borrow a pencil?
Yes. All right, keep it upside down until I start to sign. I don't know if you got my reminds, but I'm also going to do multiple choice practices for you guys on Thursday mornings at 7. So if you can't come to the Friday one, or if you just want extra practice, you can have those.